You never let me live. That was the sentence that broke something in me. I thought paying for everything made me a good father. Tuition, rent, lawyers, the quiet rescues. A man never brags about. But one morning in Plano, Texas, I learned my own son had turned every dollar into a weapon against me. My name is Michael Turner. I am 64, retired, and I walked into my regular coffee shop, expecting nothing more than black coffee and silence. Instead, I heard Daniel's voice a few tables behind me, steady, rehearsed, talking to a man with a briefcase and a woman who kept nodding like she already knew the verdict. Then my son said it again, "You never let me live," not angry, not loud, just final. I stood there pretending to read the menu, while he listed my help like evidence, and I realized this was not a family argument. This was a case being built with recordings, labels, and paperwork I barely remembered signing when grief had my hands shaking. And if I took one step toward that booth, I would become exactly the villain they needed me to be. The bell over the door gave a soft, tired sound when I stepped into Cedar Oak Café. It smelled like dark coffee and warm bread and other people's mornings. Plano was already bright in that flat, honest Texas way that makes everything look exposed. I liked mornings because they did not ask me to explain myself. I was 64 and retired and living alone in the same brick house Karen and I bought when our son was still young enough to leave his shoes in the hallway. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. So most mornings I came here. I sat by the window with a newspaper and a black coffee and let the world move past me. My right knee complained when I shifted my weight. I paused for a second before walking to the counter, letting the stiffness pass. It was nothing serious, just a reminder of time. I ordered my usual and waited while the young man poured the coffee. He knew my face. That was enough. I turned with my cup in hand and stopped. Not because I saw anything, because I heard a rhythm. My son Daniel had a way of speaking when he wanted to sound sure of himself. A little fast, slightly rehearsed. I had heard it when he was a teenager explaining why a bad idea was actually a good one. I heard it now from a booth a few tables behind me. At first I told myself it could be anyone. Plano is full of voices. But then I heard the laugh he makes under his breath, short and sharp, like he is pleased with himself before he checks if anyone else noticed. I did not turn right away. I stood there with the coffee warming my hand, my shoulder angled toward the pastry case like I was deciding between muffins. Then I looked. Daniel sat across from a woman I did not know, and beside a man in a navy suit. The man had a leather briefcase set carefully at his feet, and the kind of still posture you see in people who listen for a living. The woman leaned in when she spoke, her phone resting near her fingers, her eyes never leaving Daniel. Daniel looked older than the last time I saw him. Not wiser, just worn around the edges. He had dressed up for the meeting, hair-trimmed jacket, pressed like a man trying to match a version of himself he had described to others. I should have walked on. I knew that. I should have taken my coffee to the window and minded my own business. Instead, I stayed where I was. The man in the suit spoke quietly. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the tone. Careful. Conditional. Like someone outlining risk. Daniel leaned back and let out a breath through his nose. Then he said the sentence, "You never let me live." He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He said it like a conclusion, like something he had finally decided to say out loud. The woman nodded immediately. The man tilted his head slightly, inviting him to continue. Daniel did. He talked about money, about how it was always there and how it was never free, about school in Chicago and the apartment near the lake and the car that showed up right when he said he did not need help. He said it was not support. He said It was leverage. My throat tightened. I turned a little more, pretending to read the menu board. My knee protested again, and I shifted my weight carefully. My face stayed still. I have always been good at that. Daniel mentioned Northwestern like it was a burden, like he had been sent there against his will. He talked about the months when his internship did not pay what he expected, and how I stepped in. He said every rescue made it harder to breathe. The woman made a soft sound of agreement. The man in the suit spoke again, choosing his words slowly. He said something could be seen a certain way. He mentioned control financial in nature and what that might look like to other people. Daniel answered without hesitation. Exactly. People think he is generous. They do not see what it does to you. You cannot fail. You cannot walk away. You are always owing something. He paused, and for a moment I waited for a softer note. For him to say I meant well, or that he missed his mother, or that things were complicated. He did not. He repeated it. You never let me live. The words sat there between them like evidence. I felt my fingers tighten around the muffin wrapper until the paper creased. I loosened my grip and set it down on the counter beside me. The coffee cup trembled slightly when I lifted it. I kept it steady. I thought about the drives through snow to Chicago, when the pantry was empty and pride was not enough. The transfers I made quietly, because a father should not announce his help. The nights I stayed up running numbers so he would not have to worry. In his story, I was not a provider. I was a handler, a man who used money the way other men use force. I wanted to say his name. I wanted to ask him when I ever told him he could not leave, when I ever demanded repayment beyond respect. But I saw the way the woman watched him. I saw the way the man in the suit waited. If I stepped forward now, I would become exactly who they believed I was. So I moved. I walked past the booth without looking at them and sat at my table by the window. I unfolded the newspaper and set my coffee down carefully. Outside, a work truck pulled into the lot. The driver hopped out with a thermos and a lunch bag. He looked tired and sure of where he was going. I envied that. Behind me, Daniel's voice softened. I did not turn around again. I stared at the paper without reading it. All I could see were numbers. Tuition, rent, insurance, repairs. The quiet help that never made it into his version of the story. The coffee tasted bitter. I took one sip and set it down. I left the muffin untouched on the counter when I stood to go, and I slid a larger tip than usual onto the table, not for service, but because it felt wrong to take anything sweet with me. Outside, the sun was already high. I stood for a moment with my keys in my hand, listening to the morning, trying to understand when providing crossed a line I never saw. I got in my truck and drove home with the radio off. The morning traffic in Plano had thickened, parents in SUVs, work trucks, men in button-downs with coffee cups balanced in their consoles. Everybody moving like they had someplace they belonged. I stopped at a light on Preston Road and watched the crosswalk count down, feeling the weight of my hands on the steering wheel, steady on the outside, not as steady underneath. The house was cool when I stepped inside, quiet in the way a place gets when it is too big for one person and you stop turning on lights out of habit. I set my keys on the wooden tray by the door, the one Karen bought years ago because she said it made the house feel settled. There was a faint imprint where her hand used to pat the surface like she was reminding herself that we were home. My right knee complained as I walked toward the kitchen. Not a sharp pain, just a stiff old ache that shows up when life wants to remind you time keeps its own records. I poured a glass of water, took a sip, and sat down at the table. The same table Daniel used to spread his notebooks across pencils, scratch paper, a calculator he pretended he did not need. I stared at the wood grain and thought about what Daniel said. "You never let me live." It did not sound like something he made up on the spot. It sounded like a sentence he had carried around, polished, tested, repeated to himself until it felt solid. I tried to trace the line back. I grew up in West Texas. My father was not a cruel man, he was a working man. He believed in showing up. If the truck broke, you fixed it. If the roof leaked, you patched it. If the lights went out, you found the breaker. He was not much for talking, and I became the same way without noticing. When Karen came into my life, she was the one who spoke for both of us. She could read a room, read a face, read what a person was not saying. She would touch my arm at parties when I started to drift into my own head, and she would smile like she was pulling me back. Daniel got her gift. He would talk to her into the kitchen, while I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, listening without jumping in. Then she got sick. The sickness did not arrive with drama. It arrived with appointments, paperwork, and that first moment when the doctor looked at us with a careful expression and used words that left permanent marks. I handled what I could handle: insurance, schedules, driving, keeping the house running. Karen handled Daniel. She held him together in ways I did not know how to do. When she died, something in me went quiet. Not just grief, a kind of shutdown. The world still had bills. The world still needed managing. My son still needed a father. I just did not know how to be one with words. So I became one with money. When Daniel got accepted to Northwestern, he ran through the living room, waving the letter like he had won a championship. He hugged Karen first, then he hugged me. He was taller than me by then, and still he held on like a kid. I remember saying, "I am proud of you," and it came out stiff. Karen smiled at me like she knew I was trying. Chicago was expensive. The apartment near the lake was more than he expected. He called me late one night, voice casual, trying to make it sound like no big deal. "Dad, I might be short this month." I did not ask how he got short. I did not ask what he spent on. I told him it was fine. I told him to focus on school. I transferred the money before we got off the phone. A week later, he called again. His tone was brighter, like relief had turned into embarrassment. "I will pay you back." I told him he did not need to. I meant it. But I also remember adding one thing almost without thinking. "Just be smart about it next time." He went quiet for a beat. Not angry, just quiet. Then he said, "Yeah, sure," and we moved on. At the time, I read that silence as a young man swallowing pride. Now I wondered if it was something else. A seed of resentment. A feeling of being corrected when he already felt exposed. That became our pattern. I handled the gaps. I smoothed the rough edges. Every time something went wrong, I put my shoulder under it. When he wanted a car, I helped with the down payment. When the tire blew, I paid for new ones. When he called from a police station years later admitting he had driven when he should not have, that the words came out broken and fast. "Dad, I messed up. I drove down, hired an attorney in Dallas, paid the fees, paid the fines." In the courthouse hallway, he would not look me in the eye. His jaw was tight, like he was biting down on something he did not want to taste. I tried to say something fatherly, something about learning, about second chances. He cut in too quick. I know, I get it." Then he added softer, almost like a plea, "Please do not tell Mom if you can help it." Karen was already gone by then. He knew that. We both knew that. But grief makes people talk like the past is still reachable. That moment stayed with me, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. like he was still a boy asking for protection, like he was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. After that, Daniel drifted toward work that sounded exciting and never stayed stable. Marketing gigs, freelance projects, big plans that burned hot and cooled off fast. He called when things were good, brief and upbeat. He called when things were bad, careful and guarded. Sometimes he would say he did not want help. Sometimes he would take it anyway. And every time I sent money, I told myself I was doing the right thing. I never gave him an order. I never said, you must do this, you cannot do that. But I also know I carried expectations like tools in my pocket. Quiet, heavy, always there. Be responsible. Do not waste what you have. Make your mother proud. Make me proud. I did not say those words often. I did not need to. I assumed he felt them the way a son is supposed to. Now I wondered if he felt them like a hand on the back of his neck. I stood and walked into the garage. The air smelled like dust and motor oil, the only place in the house that still felt like mine. I opened my toolbox and ran my fingers across the organized sockets and wrenches, everything lined up the way I like it. When Daniel was 12, he used to come out here and pretend to help. He would hold a flashlight wrong, impatient when I told him to angle it higher. I would correct him, and he would sigh like I was ruining his fun. One afternoon, he snapped loud for him. "You always have to do it your way." Karen had laughed from the doorway, not mocking, just warm. "He gets that from you, Mike?" At the time, I smiled. I took it as a family joke. Standing there now, I felt the sting of it. Always my way, even when I thought I was simply doing things right. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I heard it faintly through the door from the garage, a small electronic sound trying to pull me back into the world. I did not move right away. I waited for it to buzz again. It did not. I walked inside and picked it up. No missed call. No message. The screen went dark in my hand. For a moment, I pictured Daniel in Austin or Los Angeles sitting at some table like the one in the café, leaning toward people who nodded at his pain. I wondered what he was telling them right now, and what he was leaving out. I wondered if he had slept, if he had eaten, if he still knew how to come home, or if home had become a word he used only when he needed something. I set the phone down and sat at the table again. The quiet settled around me like dust. I could feel the bill coming due, not in dollars, but in whatever happens when a father and son stop speaking the same language. And I had the uneasy sense that the conversation in that café was not the beginning of this. It was the first time I heard the plan out loud. That thought stayed with me longer than I expected. The idea that what I overheard was not a slip, not a venting moment, but something organized, planned, spoken out loud to the right people. I started noticing things after that. Small changes I would have brushed off before. Daniel called less, but when he did, his tone had shifted. Careful, measured, like he was choosing words not just to be understood, but to be remembered. One afternoon, a few weeks later, he called from Austin. He said he was working on a new consulting contract, something flexible, something that would finally let him breathe. He talked about independence, about not wanting to rely on anyone. I told him that sounded good. I meant it. There was a pause. Then he said he appreciated everything I had done for him. He said it slowly, like he was making sure the sentence was complete. I felt something tighten in my chest. Gratitude had never sounded like that before. When I asked how things were really going, he gave me a polished answer. Busy. Promising. He did not ask me anything in return. Not about my health. Not about the house. Not about whether I was managing on my own. We hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hand, wondering when our conversations had turned into interviews. A month later, Daniel came to Plano. He said he needed a place to stay for a couple of nights before heading out to Los Angeles. I told him, of course. The guest room was still ready, the sheets clean, the closet empty except for a few hangers. He arrived late in the evening. We hugged quick and awkward, like men who do not quite know how to touch anymore. He looked tired, travel-worn. His eyes moved around the house as if he were seeing it for the first time. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, takeout barbecue from the place Karen used to like. We talked about traffic and weather, and nothing that mattered. When I asked about the woman from the café, he stiffened for a fraction of a second, before saying she was someone he was seeing. Serious, he added, watching my reaction. I nodded. I said I was glad he was not alone. After dinner, he opened his laptop at the table, spreading papers out beside it. Notes. A legal pad. His phone placed carefully face down. It all looked deliberate, like he was setting up a workspace, not just checking emails. I went into the garage to give him space. Later that night, when I came back inside, I heard voices. Daniel's voice low. Someone else on speaker. A man, calm, professional. The cadence was familiar. I stopped short in the hallway. Daniel was talking about options, about how things could be framed, about patterns. The man responded evenly, reminding him that documentation mattered, that consistency mattered, that intent was harder to prove than impact. Daniel said he understood. I did not move. I did not breathe loud. I felt like a guest in my own house. The conversation ended. Daniel closed the laptop. The house went quiet again. The next morning, he left early, saying he had a call. He hugged me at the door and told me he would be in touch. His arms were stiff, his body already angled away. He forgot something. The laptop sat open on the kitchen table when I came downstairs. I knew I should not look. I told myself that. I stood there for a long moment, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the screen like it might turn dark if I waited long enough. It did not. An audio file was paused mid-screen, a list beneath it. Dates, times, short labels, dad call, money talk, argument, my name reduced to categories. I did not click anything. I did not need to. The evidence was already there. I closed the laptop gently, the way you close a door when you are not ready to see what is on the other side. I sat down and stared at the wood grain, the same table, the same pencil marks. Daniel came back an hour later. He froze when he saw the laptop shut. Something passed between us then. Not anger. Not guilt. Recognition. He did not ask if I had seen anything. I did not accuse him. We moved around each other like two people who had realized they were no longer speaking the same language. That afternoon, he packed his bag. He thanked me again. He said he would call soon. I told him to drive safe. After he left, I sat alone and tried to understand how we had gotten here. When my son stopped seeing me as a safety net and started seeing me as a liability. It was easier to blame the girlfriend, easier to blame the lawyer, easier to blame the culture that teaches people to label pain instead of sit with it. But deep down I knew that was not the whole truth. Daniel had learned something over the years I kept stepping in. He had learned that money came with memory, that every favor could be replayed, that silence could be interpreted. And somewhere along the way, he had decided that if I was going to be part of his life, I needed to be managed. I stood up and walked to the window. The street was quiet. A delivery truck passed by. A neighbor waved without slowing down. I wondered how long Daniel had been recording me, How many conversations I thought were private were now saved somewhere labeled ready to be played back for someone else to interpret. I wondered what else he had prepared. That night, I lay in bed listening to the house settle, every small sound louder than it used to be. The plan he was building had edges I could not see yet. But I knew one thing for certain. Whatever this had become, it was no longer just between a father and a son. I did not sleep much after that. I kept hearing my own voice in my head, not the words but the tone. The way a father talks when he thinks he is safe. The way he talks when he is not performing. If this was bigger than us, then it had paper behind it. It had a trail. The next morning I called Sam Whitaker, an attorney in downtown Dallas I had worked with years ago when my job still involved contracts and disputes, and people trying to slide clauses past you. Sam was not a flashy lawyer. He was steady, the kind of man who read every line and never smiled when the other side tried to charm him. He answered on the second ring. "Mike," he said, "you sound like you have not slept." I told him I needed to see him, not over the phone. Today. He gave me an address near Clyde Warren Park and told me to come in at 11. The drive down to Dallas felt longer than it used to. The highways were the same, the billboards louder, the traffic more impatient. I parked in a garage and walked to his office, my knees stiff, my stomach tighter with every step. Sam met me in the lobby and led me into a small conference room. The walls were glass, but the room still felt sealed off, like the rest of the world could not hear what was about to be said. He set a legal pad on the table and slid a pen toward me out of habit. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. The café, Daniel's voice, the lawyer at the booth, the recordings on the laptop, the sense that I was being turned into a story where I was the villain. Sam listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back and studied me. "I need your consent to look at some things," he said. "Accounts, property records, anything your son has had access to. Did you ever give him authority to act for you?" I hesitated. I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe I had been careful. Then Karen came into my mind, pale under hospital lights, her hand thinner than it should have been. The last months. The paperwork I signed without reading because the doctor needed it, and the insurance needed it, and I needed my wife to stop hurting. I nodded once. 6 years ago, after Karen died, I said. I signed something. Power of attorney. Daniel told me it was just so he could help with paperwork if I got overwhelmed. Sam did not react. Not surprise. Not judgment. Just a slow exhale as if a door had opened. He asked me to bring every document I had. Estate papers, banking statements, anything with my signature. He told me to give him access to my online accounts if I could. He said if Daniel had a durable power of attorney, the banks might have accepted him as my agent. Hearing the words agent made my skin crawl. It made my son sound like a stranger with keys to my life. I drove back to Plano and spent the afternoon digging through file drawers. Karen had been the organized one. After she passed, I kept her system out of respect, not because I understood it. Folders labeled insurance, mortgage taxes, medical. I found the old binder from the hospital, months full of forms and copies and yellow sticky notes in Karen's handwriting. My hands shook when I saw the tab that said legal. The document was there, clipped neatly. Durable power of attorney. Signed by me. Signed by Daniel. Notarized. Dated just weeks after the funeral, when the house still smelled faintly like lilies, and I was still answering the phone like she might be on the other end. I sat down at the table and held the pages, reading every line the way I should have read it then. The language was simple in the way legal language pretends to be simple. It gave Daniel authority to handle financial matters, banking, investments, transactions. It had limits, but it also had wide open doors. I remembered the day Daniel brought it over. He had sat at this same table, the one with pencil grooves from his homework, and he had spoken softly, like he was trying not to disturb my grief. "Dad, this is just to make things easier, in case you need help, in case you are not thinking straight." I had stared at the paper like it was a map in a foreign language. I had looked at my son's face, the only family I had left in that moment, and I had signed. I drove back to Dallas the next morning with the document in my passenger seat, like it was something dangerous. Sam took it and nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Now we pull statements. Real statements. Not summaries. Not screenshots." It took days. He sent requests to my brokerage, to the bank that held my checking and savings, to the credit union, where I kept a small account for home repairs. When the first packet came in, he called me back to his office. He had the papers spread across the table like evidence. Some were familiar. Some were not. He tapped a section with his pen. "Over the last 3 years, there have been withdrawals from your brokerage account," he said. "They start small, 5,000, 10,000. Then they become regular, same time each month, structured enough to look normal." He flipped to another page, and here he said, "A personal line of credit tied to your investment account, opened 2 years ago, signed by your agent under the power of attorney." My mouth went dry. "I did not open that," I said. "No," Sam replied. "Your son did." He slid a copy of the signature page toward me. Daniel's name. His signature. A box checked that read, "Attorney, in fact." I felt something cold move through my chest. Not shock this time, a hard, sinking weight. Sam watched me carefully. "Mike," he said, "I need you to understand something. With a durable power of attorney, a lot of this can be legal. It does not mean it is right. It does not mean he acted in your best interest. But it means the bank may not have broken any rules by accepting it." I stared at the pages as if they might rearrange themselves into a better story. "So he can just take it," I said. "He can just do it, and it is legal." Sam shook his head. "Not exactly. He has duties. He is supposed to act for you. Not for himself. That is fiduciary duty. But proving a breach can be hard if the paper trail is clean, and he claims it was for your benefit." My throat tightened. "For my benefit," I said. "Like paying for his rent is for my benefit. Like covering his mess is for my benefit." Sam did not answer. He did not need to. He turned the page again. "There is more," he said. "Not just money. There are communications, requests for records. Your online banking password was changed last year. Your mailing address for certain statements was updated. Updated to where I asked already, knowing I would not like the answer." Sam looked at the sheet. "A UPS store box in Austin." I leaned back in the chair. The room tilted slightly, and for a second I thought I might throw up. My son had not just taken money, he had redirected the truth. I pictured Daniel at some counter renting a mailbox like a man hiding an affair. I pictured him sorting through envelopes with my name on them, deciding what I should and should not see. Sam gathered the papers into a neat stack, keeping his voice calm. "You have options," he said. "We can revoke the power of attorney immediately. We can notify every institution. We can demand a full accounting of what he did in your name. After that, we can decide if we pursue civil action." I heard the words, but my mind snagged on something else. If I do this, I said, it becomes public. It becomes a case. People will look at me like I am either a fool or a monster. Sam held my gaze. "People are already looking at you, Mike. You just do not control the story anymore." I sat in that glass room with the Dallas skyline behind Sam and the paper trail of my own life on the table, realizing the betrayal was not a single act. It was a system. A slow drain hidden inside something I had signed when I was not fully myself. When I left his office, the sun outside was harsh and bright. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, squinting, listening to traffic, trying to feel the ground under my feet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Daniel. "Dad, can we talk tonight? It is important." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering, and for the first time I wondered if the man asking to talk was still my son, or if he was already acting like my attorney, in fact. I did not reply to Daniel right away. I put the phone back in my pocket and stood there on the sidewalk in Dallas, letting the heat settle into my bones. Cars rushed past like nothing important had happened. People crossed the street laughing, talking about dinner plans. I felt strangely transparent, like whatever was happening to me was already old news to everyone else. The first sign that his story was moving faster than I was came from a place I did not expect. 3 days later, I walked into the grocery store near my house in Plano. Same place I had shopped for years, same aisles, same faces. I nodded at a woman I had known since our kids were in middle school together. She hesitated before nodding back. Her smile was thin, careful, like she was trying not to say the wrong thing. At the checkout, the cashier, who usually chatted about weather and football, barely met my eyes. She scanned my items quickly and wished me a good day without looking up. I told myself I was imagining it. But then it kept happening. At the gym, a man I had lifted beside for years suddenly found a reason to move to another machine. At church, the couple behind me chose a different pew. Conversations stopped when I walked into a room, then restarted quieter, softer, like I was not meant to hear. I had not said anything to anyone. Not about Daniel, not about the lawyer, not about the accounts. Silence felt safer. Silence felt dignified. Silence also left space for other voices. A week later, I got a call from an old colleague. We had worked together for almost 20 years, managed crews, solved problems in the heat and the dust. He had been at my house for barbecues. He had met Karen. He had watched Daniel grow up. He did not waste time with small talk. I heard some things he said carefully. About you and your boy. I waited. He went on slower now. "I do not know the details, Mike. But if there is truth to it, maybe you tried too hard to steer his life. Sometimes letting go earlier helps." The words landed heavier than anything Daniel had said. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I thanked him for his honesty and ended the call. When I set the phone down, my hand lingered on it longer than usual, like it might explain itself. That night I searched Daniel's name online. I did not know what I was looking for. Articles? Posts? Something concrete. I found nothing official. No lawsuits. No accusations with letterhead. But there were comments, mentions, vague references on social media from people I did not know. Hard growing up under money control. Toxic parent dynamics are real. Proud of you for setting boundaries. The language was familiar, clean, confident. The kind of language that spreads because it feels righteous. Daniel had not named me. He did not have to. Anyone who knew us could fill in the blanks. In Austin and Los Angeles, where he worked, the story traveled easily. Creative circles understand narratives like his. The talented son, the wealthy controlling father. It fit neatly into conversations about power and freedom and emotional harm. People nodded. People sympathized. People shared it like a lesson learned. Back home in Plano, the story changed shape but not direction. It became quieter, more polite, but no less damaging. At the golf club, a man I had played with for years commented on the weather hole, and then added almost as an aside that kids these days carried a lot. More than we realized. He looked at me while he said it, not accusing, just observing. I smiled and said nothing. At a family gathering, my sister asked how Daniel was doing. When I told her I had not spoken to him recently, she pursed her lips and said maybe space was healthy. Maybe I should give him room to be his own man. I nodded. I always nodded. Everywhere I went, I felt the same shift. Not hostility. Distance. A quiet verdict reached without me present. It was not just the money anymore. It was my reputation. The years I spent being reliable, being steady, being the man people called when something needed fixing. All of it was being rewritten into something colder. The worst part was how reasonable it all sounded when I heard it secondhand. He had paid for everything. He had expectations. He had trouble letting go. None of those statements were false. They were just incomplete. And incomplete truths travel faster than complicated ones. I thought about calling Daniel, about asking him to stop, to clarify, to tell people that whatever issues we had were private. But I could already hear the response. You are trying to control the narrative. Anything I said would become proof of what he believed I was. So I stayed quiet. Sam called to update me on the revocation paperwork. He said once it was filed and processed, Daniel's authority would end. He asked if I was ready. I told him to proceed. When the confirmation came through, I felt relief, short-lived and private. It did not change how people looked at me. It did not restore anything that had been said. Daniel did not react immediately. No angry call. No explanation. Just silence. That silence spread. Days passed. Then weeks. I started eating dinner earlier, going to bed earlier, avoiding places where conversations lingered. The house felt smaller now, like it was closing in on itself. One afternoon, I ran into a neighbor while taking out the trash. He hesitated before speaking, then cleared his throat. I hope things work out with your son, he said. Kids need space sometimes. I thanked him. He meant well. That made it worse. When I went inside, I stood by the window and watched the street. The same houses, the same trees. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I had been moved without being asked. Daniel had spoken. The world had listened. And I was beginning to understand that whatever came next would not be decided by who was right, but by who stayed standing when the noise finally settled. That became my new reality. Not truth, not justice, not even conflict in the way I understood conflict. Just a story that had already been told and a crowd that had already decided how to feel about it. For a while I kept thinking I should respond. I should defend myself. I should call my sister, call the guys at the club, sit someone down and explain what really happened. I should make Daniel stop. I should make people understand. Then one morning I caught myself rehearsing sentences in the shower, like I was preparing for court. I shut the water off and stood there dripping, embarrassed by my own desperation. I had spent my whole life solving problems. When a project went sideways, you gathered the facts. You made a plan, you executed it. You did not stand around begging people to see your point of view. So I did the only thing that still felt like mine to do. I stopped fighting for a story that was never going to be fair. Sam called with updates from the banks and brokerage. He told me the revocation had been processed at most institutions. A couple needed extra verification. One wanted me to sign in person. He asked if I wanted to move forward with a formal demand for accounting. I sat at the kitchen table and looked at the empty chair across from me, the space where Karen used to sit, where Daniel used to sprawl his notebooks, where I used to believe family was simple. No, I said. Sam was quiet. Mike, he said, if you do not demand an accounting, you may never know exactly how far this went. I know far enough, I replied. He hesitated again, like he was trying to decide if I was making a smart decision or an emotional one. You are letting him off easy, he said. I stared at my hands. The veins stood out more these days. The skin was thinner. The body always tells you when time is running. Maybe I am letting myself off, I said. After we hung up, I walked into the garage and sat on the small stool by my workbench. I opened the toolbox and closed it again, without taking anything out. It felt like an old habit searching for purpose. I thought about all the ways revenge could look. I could sue. I could expose. I could drag Daniel's name through the mud the way he had done to mine. I could force him to produce records, emails, transfers. I could win on paper. But winning on paper would not give me back Karen. It would not rewrite the years. It would not make my son look at me with respect. It would just turn my life into a file and my grief into evidence. I decided I would rather live quietly than spend my remaining years proving I deserved to. That afternoon, I did something I had been avoiding. I pulled up my finances on the laptop, the real statements Sam had gotten for me. I looked at the numbers without flinching. The losses were real. The damage was already done. I could chase every dollar, but the chasing itself would cost more than money. I made a list on a yellow legal pad, not of what Daniel owed me, of what I still owned. The house, the truck, a modest retirement account that had not been completely drained, a small cabin I co-owned with my brother near Broken Bow, Oklahoma, a place Karen loved because the air smelled like pine instead of asphalt. Then I made a second list, what I did not need anymore. The extra vehicle I kept because Daniel said he might want it one day. The storage unit full of furniture from his old apartments that I paid to keep because he always said he would come get it. The membership at the golf club where people smiled too politely now. One by one, I started cutting cords. I called the storage place and scheduled a clean-out. When I opened the unit, dust rose in a soft cloud. Old boxes, a futon, mismatched chairs, framed prints from Los Angeles, he once called essential for his brand. I loaded what I wanted into the truck and told the manager he could auction the rest. It felt like throwing away a version of Daniel I had been financing. I sold the extra car to a young couple who needed something reliable. They thanked me like I had done them a favor. I watched them drive away, and I realized I was not sad. I was relieved. At the bank, I changed every password. I added extra verification. I removed any forwarding address I did not recognize. The woman behind the desk asked politely if everything was all right. I said yes. That was the truth in a strange way. Something in me had settled. Not because things were fixed, but because the fight had stopped. Daniel did not call. Not that week. Not the next. I imagined him noticing the doors closing, the authority gone. The easy transfers stopped. The safety net tightening without a dramatic announcement. I knew how he would interpret it. Not as a boundary, as punishment, as proof. Let him. For the first time, I was not interested in managing his interpretation. A month later, a letter arrived from a bank in Austin. It was addressed to me but mailed to my Plano home as if someone had tried to reroute it and failed. The envelope looked like it had been handled too many times. I opened it slowly. It was a notification that a request had been made to change mailing preferences. The request had been denied due to authority restrictions. Denied. I sat down, letter in my hand, and felt something like calm wash over me. Not victory, calm. The system had finally said no for me. That evening I walked through the house and turned off lights in rooms I did not use. I closed doors that stayed open out of habit. I sat on the back patio with a glass of water and listened to the neighborhood settle. Lawn sprinklers clicked on. A dog barked twice and then stopped. Somewhere down the street, a man laughed at something on television. I thought about Daniel in Austin or Los Angeles, surrounded by people who believed his story. I wondered how long that story would hold up when my money was no longer playing the villain in it. I looked at my phone on the table beside me. No messages. No calls. I did not feel abandoned. Not exactly. I felt like I had stepped out of the ring, and I had the quiet, uneasy feeling that when the fight ended for me, it was only beginning for him. The next weeks were quiet, in the way a storm is quiet, right before it turns. Nothing dramatic happened on my end. No confrontation. No late-night knocking at my door. Just the steady rhythm of days' coffee mail, small chores that kept my hands busy. Then the first crack showed up in a place I did not expect. A mutual friend texted me one evening, a guy I knew through work years back, someone who had kept a foot in both worlds, Dallas business circles and the younger creative crowd Daniel ran with. "Hey Mike, you doing all right? Heard Daniel is having a rough time." I stared at the message for a while. My thumb hovered over the screen. I did not ask what rough meant. I already had a few guesses. In my experience, rough starts out as a slow leak. It becomes a flood when no one admits the pipe is broken. I set the phone down and went outside to water the small patch of plants Karen used to fuss over. The hose hissed softly. The air smelled like cut grass and heat. I told myself it was not my problem anymore. I told myself I had done what I needed to do. 2 days later, I got an email from a number I did not recognize. The subject line was plain. "Can you talk?" No greeting. No explanation. Just those 3 words. I opened it and saw it was Daniel. He wrote a few short sentences. He said he knew it had been a while. He said he was not asking for anything. He said he just needed to talk. He asked if I could meet him in Dallas. Neutral ground. Coffee. 30 minutes. Neutral ground. Like we were negotiating. I felt my chest tighten, not with anger, but with the old instinct to brace for impact. A father does not stop being a father just because he stops writing checks. Still, I sat with it. I did not reply right away. I made myself finish what I was doing. I rinsed the hose. I locked the back door. I washed the dinner plate. Small acts of control, like setting down tools before you handle something heavy. That night, I finally answered. "Tomorrow. 2:00. Uptown. The café near McKinney Avenue. I will sit by the window." I kept it short. I kept it clean. The next day, I drove down to Dallas with the same radio silence I had gotten used to. The highways were packed lanes, merging and splitting like arguments. I parked a few blocks away and walked slowly, my knees stiff but manageable. The sun bounced off glass buildings. People hurried past me with earbuds in eyes forward, looking like they had already decided what mattered. The café was busy but not loud. I ordered black coffee and sat by the window, hands resting on the table, shoulders squared. I did not rehearse anything this time. I told myself I would listen. That was all. Daniel came in 7 minutes late. Not a big deal, but it told me something. He was not in control of his schedule the way he liked to pretend. He scanned the room, spotted me, and hesitated. He looked different. He had lost weight. Not in a healthy way. His jacket hung slightly looser. His face was sharper around the cheekbones, and his eyes had a tired shine, like he was running on caffeine and pride. He walked over and stopped at the table. He did not reach for a hug. I did not, either. We nodded, two men, acknowledging that the old gestures had become complicated. He sat down and stared at the coffee menu, even though he did not need to. Then he looked at me. "Thanks for meeting," he said quietly. I nodded once. He ordered a drink when the barista came by, something small, like he did not want to take up space. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of people trying not to make the wrong move. Daniel cleared his throat. "I know you probably think I am here to ask for money," he said. "I am not." I watched his face. I did not react. He continued, words careful, like he was stepping across glass. "Things got complicated. The last few months. A client backed out. Then another. I had some cash set aside, but it went fast. Austin is not cheap. Neither is LA. I said nothing. He swallowed. "My lease is up. My credit got hit. I have been juggling bills." He looked down at his hands. His fingers were restless, tapping once against the table and stopping as if he caught himself. "The girlfriend," he said, and then stopped. He tried again. "The relationship did not hold up when things got stressful. She said she needed stability. She said she could not be with someone who was always blaming his father for everything." That landed in the air between us. I did not take satisfaction from it. I felt something like a quiet sadness, the kind you feel when you watch someone walk into a wall you warned them about, and they still act surprised. "It hurts." Daniel took a slow breath. "I did not realize how much of my life was built around you." "Being there," he said. "Not just money. The idea that if things went bad, I would not fall all the way." I stared out the window for a second, then back at him. "You did not fall all the way," I said. "You are here." He gave a short laugh that did not carry humor. "Yeah. I am here because I do not know what I am doing." There it was. The honest sentence, not polished, not for an audience. He leaned forward slightly, voice lower. "I told people a story about you," he said. "I told it so much I started believing it. Some of it was real. Some of it was just me needing someone to blame. I do not know where one ends and the other begins anymore." My jaw tightened. Not from anger. From the effort of holding myself steady. Daniel looked at me like he expected me to explode, to lecture, to demand an apology. I did not give him that. Instead, I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest for months. "What do you want from me right now?" He blinked. He looked genuinely confused, like he had expected the conversation to follow a script. "I want to know how you did it," he said. "After Mom, after everything. How you kept going. How you did not fall apart." His voice cracked on the last words, and he pressed his lips together quickly, as if embarrassed by the sound. That hit me harder than any accusation, because it was not a request for money. It was a request for something I had not been offering. Not guidance in the way I used to offer it, quick and practical. Something deeper. A map for living. I took a sip of coffee, letting the bitterness settle. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to fix him fast, to hand him a plan, to tell him exactly what to do. I let that urge pass. You get up, I said finally. You do the next right thing. You do not call it courage. You do not call it strength. You just do it because nobody else can do it for you. Daniel stared at me, eyes wet but not spilling. He nodded once, slow. I have never done that, he admitted. Not fully. I could have said you are 36 years old, you should have. I could have said I gave you every chance. Instead, I said something simpler. Then start now. He exhaled and the sound was shaky. We sat there in silence again, but it was a different silence. Less defensive, more honest. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. Can I come to Plano for a few days? Not to take anything. Just to reset. To figure out next steps. I looked at him. My mind ran through memories, the laptop files, the story he spread, the money redirected, the authority he used. Then I heard my own boundary forming inside me, clear as a line on a blueprint. If he came back, it could not be the old arrangement. I set my cup down gently. We can talk about that, I said. And when we do, it is going to be different this time. Daniel nodded like he understood, or like he wanted to believe he did. I paid for my coffee when we stood to leave. Daniel started to protest, then stopped himself. We walked out into the Dallas heat together, not as close as we used to be, but not strangers either. When I got back to my truck, my phone buzzed again. A message from Sam. Mike, the bank in Austin, called. Someone tried to make another change on your accounts. They were denied. Call me when you can. I stared at the screen, feeling the ground shift under what I thought was a simple meeting. Whatever Daniel was facing, whatever he was admitting, something else was still moving in the background. I called Sam from the truck before I even pulled out of the parking spot. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Sam, I just got your message. Another change attempt. He did not waste time. It came through the same channel as before, he said. Someone tried to update contact preferences and request access changes. The institution flagged it. It was denied. But it tells me someone is still trying. Someone, I repeated. Sam paused. It could be Daniel. It could be someone with information Daniel gave. Either way, the pattern matters. I want you to come in tomorrow. We need to tighten a few things and document this. I looked across the street at a man locking his bike, moving like the day was simple. What do you recommend, Sam? We already revoked the authority, he said. Now we protect the perimeter. And Mike, you need to decide how far you want to take this. If it keeps happening, it stops being a family misunderstanding. It becomes a record. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, thinking about Daniel, sitting across from me in that café. Eyes tired, voice cracked when he asked how I survived after his mother. That question had sounded real, but the attempt on my accounts sounded real too. Two truths moving in opposite directions. The drive back to Plano felt longer. The sky was turning the pale color it gets before evening, and the heat still clung to everything like it had something to prove. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a minute before going inside, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Daniel called that night. Not a text, not an email, an actual call. My phone rang in my hand like it had weight. I answered. Hey, he said quietly. You home? I am, I said. There was a pause. I could hear traffic behind him. I have been thinking about what you said he told me. About starting now. I waited. He took a breath. I need to tell you something before I come to Plano. I tried to change something on your accounts a couple weeks ago. Not to take money, I swear. I was trying to fix the mess I already caused. I thought if I could redirect statements back to you, it would look like I was making it right. But I did not know how to do it without hitting the same wall. My jaw tightened. I felt anger rise hot and quick, then settle into something colder. You did not think to call me, I said. You did not think to say, Dad. I want to make this right. You just tried to move things around again. I heard him swallow. I was ashamed, he said. I kept telling myself I could handle it. I kept telling myself you would never believe me anyway. I closed my eyes. Shame was not an excuse, but it was an explanation. I understood shame. I had lived beside it for years without naming it. Daniel, I said, listen to me. You do not get to touch anything that has my name on it anymore. Not to help, not to fix, not to prove something. That door is closed. His voice got smaller. Okay. And if you come here, I continued, it will be on new terms. You will not be my project. You will not be my responsibility in the way you are used to. You will be my son. That is all I can offer. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said two words that sounded like they cost him something. I understand. The next day, I drove back to Dallas and sat with Sam again. We updated security on every account. We added more verification steps. We put alerts on anything that moved. Sam documented the denied attempts. He asked me if I wanted to demand an accounting from Daniel. I stared at the paper on the table. If I do that, I said, it turns into war. Sam nodded slowly. It can also turn into accountability. Sometimes people do not change until the consequences stop being theoretical. I thought about Daniel saying he had never done the next right thing. I thought about the way he watched my face, expecting punishment, expecting the old dynamic. I shook my head. Not yet, I said. If he keeps trying, then yes. If he lies again, then yes. But I want to give him one chance to choose the hard path on his own. Sam leaned back. Then your boundary has to be iron, he said. Not emotional, not flexible. Iron. I drove home with that word in my head. Iron. Daniel arrived in Plano on a Friday afternoon. He parked at the curb and stood for a moment, with his bag in his hand, looking at the house like it might reject him. I watched from the front window before I opened the door. I needed that extra second to set my face the right way. When I opened it, he looked at me and did not smile. Hey, he said. Hey, I answered. He stepped inside. The air between us was tense but not hostile, more like a wire pulled tight. I showed him the guest room. Clean sheets, a towel on the bed. No speeches. No welcome back celebration. He nodded, set his bag down, and looked around like he was checking if anything had changed. Over dinner, we talked about practical things, his lease, his clients, what he could do next. I offered information, not solutions. When he drifted toward excuses, I stayed quiet until he heard himself. At one point, he asked cautiously if I was going to ask him for money back. I considered my answer. I am not chasing you, I said. I am not negotiating love with debt. But you are going to rebuild your life without using mine. That includes your reputation, your relationships, your work, all of it. His eyes flicked up to mine. And you, he asked. I leaned back in my chair. I am going to live what is left of my life without proving myself to anyone, I said. Not to the club, not to your friends, not even to you. If you ever understand me, it will be because you chose to, not because I forced it. Daniel stared at his plate. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath. I am sorry, he said, and the words were quiet. Not polished. Not for an audience. It was not a perfect apology. It did not cover everything. It did not erase what he had done. But it was real enough to matter. I nodded once. That was all I could give in that moment. That night, after he went to bed, I walked through the house and turned off the lights. I stood in the hallway and listened to the quiet. It was different now. Not empty, not full, just present. I thought about Karen, about how she used to say, love is not just what you give, it is what you teach someone to carry when you are not there. I had taught Daniel to depend. Now I was trying late to teach him to stand. In the morning, I poured coffee and sat on the back patio, the air still cool before the Texas heat took over. Daniel stepped outside a few minutes later, rubbing his eyes, looking older than he should for 36. He sat across from me without speaking. I watched him breathe. I watched him exist in the space without demanding anything, and I realized this was what letting him live actually looked like. Not rescuing, not controlling, not disappearing, just staying close enough to be a father and far enough to let him become a man. If you have ever paid for everything and still felt like the villain, tell me what line you wish you had drawn sooner. And if you have ever been the son convinced the help was a cage, tell me what it took to finally see the person holding the key.